name's Hazel. I'm the lead officer for Scrutiny in Monmouthshire Council. Apologies that we're starting late slightly this morning, a few technical problems, but I'm here to open the meeting of the first Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee of this new administration. And the first agenda item will be to elect the chair. And chairs are appointed by council, but they're noted by this committee. So we'd like to do the first item on the agenda, which is to note the appointment of the chair, and that is Councillor Alistair Neil. So, Councillor Neil, would you please like to take over the meeting? Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. I appreciate that. And if I may just welcome everybody to the meeting and to say that I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. I've got to know quite a number of you already, and it's fantastic how diverse and how we're going to bring a lot to the meeting. If you allow me, I'd like to also just make a few comments about how I think that we can operate as an effective scrutiny committee. And the work of our committee is important. It's very clear that good councils have effective executives, but also effective scrutiny, and one without the other doesn't work well for the benefit of the council and ultimately for our residents. Our overall role is to make recommendations, not decisions, and we'll be doing that to help improve the quality of services to the people of Monmouthshire. Scrutiny is a critical friend. This will not be an area for political meetings. Our work is impartial and non-partisan. The aim of the Performance and Overview Select Committee will be to support improvement, possibly averting problems before they happen. Constructive challenge is part of this to the Cabinet, holding the Cabinet collectively and individual members to account for service delivery and for risk management. And we also conduct robust financial monitoring and scrutinise the Council's delivery of corporate objectives outlined in the corporate plan, which we will await in due course, and we'll turn to that later in the agenda. We can, of course, review decisions and policies to ensure that they are working, but the most effective scrutiny committees also focus on pre-decision making to assist the executive in making good decisions, shaping good policy. Our work is vital to good corporate governance, ensuring open, accountable, transparent decision making. In our work ahead too, we can amplify the voice of the public and of their concerns, and indeed of our partners and stakeholders. We'll be interested in the effect of policies on our communities. We should bear in mind too that we also have the role and indeed the powers to scrutinise wider public services, anything that affects residents in Monmouthshire. We will set our own work programme, and in doing so we will need to understand the Cabinet's plans, its work programme and their strategic priorities for the corporate plan. We already have some really useful core information, which we've included in today's agenda, which includes self-assessment by officers and risk assessment summaries to help us understand what may be our priority areas, hopefully with a good level of consensus. It's part of the role of the chair to manage the meetings, but it's much more than that. It's important that I and the committee work effectively outside the meetings with officers, with executive members and community groups and partners. I'll try to liaise with cabinet members and supervise the work programme. There'll be a number of reasons for the questions that we will ask as a committee, but primarily we will be asking questions to get more useful information and to keep officers and cabinet members on their toes. It'll also be helpful for officers and executive members to consider the possibilities of unintended consequences of planned actions or of courses of action already being taken, and sometimes the unconsidered consequences of plans and potential action. And I think that beholds on us the thinking of what might be possible in the course of actions planned. If we find ourselves asking questions that stray too far from helping to improve services or the quality of life of the people of Monmouthshire, we should probably ask ourselves the question, why are we asking this? In reaching recommendations, we should ensure as far as possible that we triangulate the use of evidence and check that it's right alongside a wider range of information to make sure that our recommendations are balanced and accurate. Finally, we should be realistic. Performance and overview could take us into myriad directions. This would not be wise. Effective scrutiny is focus and consistency. So I suggest that it will be better for us to shape our forward plan with this in mind. Not too many areas done well will be much more helpful and effective than lots of areas spread thinly. So thank you. And we'll move on, if we may, to the next item on the agenda, which is the appointment of Vice Chair. Do I have any nominations for appointment of Vice Chair?
Can I?
Sorry, Councillor Bond and Councillor Chandler.
Can I nominate Laura Wright, please?
Thank you. And Councillor
Can I nominate?
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Can I nominate Councillor Tony Keir, please?
Thank you. And Councillor Chandler?
As the one member here that's not part of either the administration party or the main opposition, I would like to nominate myself.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. So I think we go straight to do I have any seconders of these nominations? I think Councillor Pavia.
Happy to second Councillor Keys.
And do I have a seconder for, thank you, Councillor Pavia, for Councillor Wright?
Yeah, I'll second Councillor Wright.
And do I have a seconder for Councillor Chandler? Okay, so we have two candidates for the position of Vice Chair, and I suggest we move straight to a vote on this, a straightforward vote. Hazel?
Yes, if we could take each candidate in turn, please. Could we please have a show of hands, please, for Councillor Wright? If you could raise your hand if you're remote as well, so that it's very clear. We've got one in the chamber, and I can see two at home. Is that correct? Councillor Bond and Councillor Wright. Anybody else? Nope. Okay, so that's three for Councillor Wright. And could we please have a show of hands for Councillor Keir? I can see 1, 2, 3 in the chamber and another one, Councillor Webb, at home. So that's 4 to 3. So the Vice Chair, it goes to Councillor Tony Keir. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. And also thank you to Councillor Wright and Councillor Chandler for being supportive. I appreciate that. And can I ask the Vice Chair possibly to join us up here? Councillor Keir, it might be more helpful just to be part of the meeting at this stage as Vice Chair, as you now occupy that role. Thank you and congratulations. As Councillor Keir moves up to this position in the chamber, could I ask Hazel, have we any on item 4 any apologies for absence?
We do, Chair. We have an apology from Councillor Sandals.
Noted, and thank you. And do we have any on item 5 any declarations of interest? None that I can see in the chamber and none online, so thank you. I think we're all getting the hang of declarations of interest. You know, that starts with deep concern that we're not declaring when we believe we should, but I think we're all picking up good experience of that. That's really good to see. So we're moving on to the item number 6, the public open forum. And are there any items for that, Hazel, that we've been pre-notified of?
No, we have no.
Thank you. So it's just really on that particular item to note that this will be a regular item on our agenda and that members of the public, they can be present in person, but they can also provide us in advance with written questions or indeed pre-recorded audio or video in order that might suit some people to do that for a variety of reasons. And it's really just to make sure that as members we're aware of that, because engagement with the public will be a very important part of our committee moving forward. Councillor Bond, I think you raised your hand.
Just to ask, have we got any public here today, please?
Sorry, I beg your pardon. There are none, Hazel, today, yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on, if I may, to item number 7. I'm conscious that we've got some lengthy item in terms of papers, and I wonder if I could just offer a couple of preliminary points about this, if I may. The first one is that my expectation as Chair of Performance and Overview is that the officers who bring forward reports will do a really good job in bringing out the key issues from within the reports. It's fabulous to be able to see a lot of the detail that is laid out in front of us, and I'm absolutely not criticising that in these reports, but I will want to see that key issues are brought forward to in the summary sections of the reports for a number of reasons, and they are important. One reason is so that we understand what it is that officers believe to be the key issues, and that we might agree with that, or we might have different thoughts or additional key issues. 2, it's to ensure that the Cabinet members and all councillors, and indeed any resident who's interested in looking at this, has the opportunity to understand not just the forest of trees, but what the wood looks like. And that becomes really important from an open democracy point of view, as well as good governance. So I'm really going to be looking at it from that point of view. And then thirdly, in order for us to be able to digest the information and be effective in our roles. So I'd ask if officers could note that, and if reports are brought forward for performance and overview that I don't believe meet that need, then I'm likely to be pushing them back and saying we need something clearer in terms of understanding the key issues contained. So thank you for allowing me just to give those preliminary comments about the reports. And with that in mind, I would ask us in this meeting to focus on what we believe to be the key issues and not on the myriad issues that we could potentially find ourselves lost in. So with that in mind, could I open item number 7, which is the Welsh Language Annual Monitoring Report. And we have with us today officers, senior officers of the Council. Future meetings are going to also have the Cabinet members present. They will certainly be invited to join the meetings. And the purpose is not to make life difficult for people. The purpose overall is to try and help, to try and make sure that we can help them do their work properly and well. So we'll certainly be looking for that. But because we're doing something that's fairly retrospective, it seemed highly appropriate that on this occasion we have officers, senior officers present. And so I welcome the senior officers who've joined the meeting in the chamber. On the Welsh Language Annual Monitoring Report, I'm not sure, Matthew, is it yourself who's going to speak to that? And I don't know if there are any preliminary comments that you would wish to provide to members of the committee. And after that, we'll be looking for questions from members of the committee. But Matthew.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, members, councillors, and those watching at home. I'm Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy, Performance and Scrutiny, for the benefit of those watching at home. Despite the presence of scrutiny in my title and my overall responsibility for the scrutiny function, I'm here today to be scrutinised by the committee, as I also have responsibility for Monmouthshire's Welsh language function. I wouldn't normally be bringing this report to you. It would be our Welsh language officer. We recently had a retirement. Our previous Welsh language officer, Alan Burkett, retired earlier in the year, and his replacement has yet to start, but joins us next week. And we're joined today, you'll see on the screen, by Nia Roberts, who's been appointed to the post of Welsh language officer. So Nia's co-author of this report, but I'll be taking it through today as Nia gets used to the role and begins to get the experience of working with committees. But I'm sure you'll join me in welcoming her to the role of Welsh language officer. The purpose of the report today is to give you an overview of our performance in meeting the Welsh language standards. and that's a requirement of the Welsh Language Measure 2011. We normally probably, in a normal year, would have brought this 2 or 3 weeks previously to get it into the Commissioner's office by the end of June. But in light of the elections, it's just come into you a couple of weeks later than it normally would do. Key to us, we have a Welsh language strategy. Monmouthshire's the gateway to Wales. It's a really important part of our culture, our heritage. It matters a huge amount, I think, to this council and to the residents of Monmouthshire. This report isn't evaluating the entirety of the Welsh language strategy. It's looking specifically at the standards. There are 170 or so standards related to the Welsh language. Not all of those apply to Monmouthshire County Council. There are different standards applying to different parts of Wales based on their unique history and identity. So to give an example of a couple of standards, and don't worry, I'm not going to talk about 150 standards individually, attendance at meetings and use of language in meetings. Here in Monmouthshire, we're required to produce simultaneous translation if 10% of attendees at a meeting require to use it. Now, in another part of Wales, that would be a requirement, if you're in Ceredigion, for example, an automatic requirement. We always try and accommodate that with people looking to use Welsh anyway, but that's an example of where standards differ. So to just give you a couple of examples of some of the other standards, things like when people write to us, they have a right to reply. If they write to us in Welsh, they have a right to reply in Welsh, and that reply shouldn't take any longer than had they written to us in English. Our website needs to be fully bilingual. There should be no difference in the quality of experience when people interact with us in terms of documents, irrespective of the language they are speaking in. However, in talking then about some of our response to the standard, we do have to recognise that the number of Welsh speakers in our part of the world is much lower, and we recognise that not all officers are Welsh speakers. We do have challenges recruiting to Welsh language roles. And one of the issues that's highlighted in key issues is that very challenge of providing an equal service in the medium of Welsh. I'm not here to talk about the Welsh language strategy, but one of the goals of that strategy is that people are able to use the language in their interactions with public service, and we make that easier. We normalise the use of Welsh language, and Welsh speakers know that they can come to us. So one of the things we do in that respect is look to advertise more roles, particularly in frontline customer service positions, as Welsh essential. So to give a very real example, Nia that's joining us today, Nia was previously, or is until Friday, a customer advisor in one of our community hubs in Abergavenny. Nia's a Welsh speaker in a frontline position. That job has been re-advertised as a Welsh language essential role to ensure that people using that hub have someone there that they can speak to in Welsh. Similarly, when we advertise jobs in the contact centre, we advertise a certain percentage of those as Welsh essential. And in terms of other roles then, and you'll see some of this in the monitoring report, we strive to offer training and encourage as many people as possible to learn the language. Now, just highlighting some of the challenges that I've picked out from the report, that has been one of the areas perhaps we haven't done as well as we would like in recent period. Numbers of staff attending training courses have been lower over the period of this report. I think our sense is, and this is partially anecdotal, but that a lot of people prefer to do that sort of learning face-to-face, and people haven't been as keen to do remote attendance at training during the pandemic. So we have to have a real push to increase that. We've been quite successful in ensuring that jobs advertised, you'll see that on page 3.3 of the report, 98.8% have a specific criteria relating to Welsh language skills. That means if candidates are equal in all other areas, and one of them is a Welsh speaker and the other isn't, they actually attract points on that job person specification when we're evaluating it. You will see in the monitoring report, I've highlighted paragraph 3.3 of the cover report itself, you'll see figures in there for the number of staff who are Welsh speakers. So we have seen a growth in the number of Welsh-speaking staff in the organisation, And we've also seen growth in the overall Welsh language skills of employees. So to give an example, 31st of March 2021, we had 35 fluent Welsh speakers on our staff group. At 31st of March 2022, that was 44. So we've actually been very successful, perhaps not as successful as we would like, but getting more Welsh speakers into posts. I do just want to highlight one other challenge, and it's slightly outside of the period of this monitoring report, but I still think it's worth mentioning it to the committee, and it is sort of referenced in the monitoring report. We have recently had a couple of challenges to our application of the Welsh language standards from the Commissioner as a result of issues raised by the public. It isn't featured in this monitoring report because the issue at time of writing was still live. That related to how we address issues of street naming. So there was a change to our street naming policy. Now, our policy actually goes much further than many others in Wales. New street names are either bilingual or Welsh only. And we do a huge amount of work to research those names, ensure the historical accuracy. We do much more than many councils. Our policy was changed in light of specific guidance from the Welsh Language Commissioner. The policy itself is compliant. The challenge we had was that we hadn't given due consideration to the Welsh language in changing the policy. So technically, there was no issue with the policy itself. It is still much more stringent than many others in this part of the world, and at the very least consistent with the whole of Gwent. But this is one of the key things. We were challenged on we had given consideration to the Welsh language, but it was upheld that it wasn't given sufficient consideration. So we did it, and the way in which we do this is through the impact assessments that accompany reports. So there's a section there. Have you considered the impact of this policy change on the Welsh language? And I think that's one thing for all scrutineers to be mindful of when looking at changes. That complaint has been upheld on the basis not that we didn't have the right policy, not that we didn't actually have the right process in place, but on the quality of the comments put in that box as to how the policy would impact on the Welsh language. We'll bring that back in more detail to the committee, or certainly make it available for you to examine as part of your work programme as this evolves. But I did just want to highlight that as a fairly recent issue, and in the sort of the spirit of openness, and it's obviously referred to in para 3.4 of the report. But Chair, recognise that your sort of inputs and sort of your opening remarks and keeping this sort of tight input from myself, providing you're happy with that, I'll pause and through yourself be available for any questions.
Thank you, Matthew. That's very helpful lead-in. And can I also welcome Nia? It's good to have you with us, Nia, and I'm sure you're going to play a really important part in this moving forward. We have some questions which I'm going to start with, if I may, Councillor Pavia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm unsure if you're going to go on the list of raised hands, because obviously Laura put her hand up.
I do beg your pardon, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
I do beg your pardon, Councillor Wright, I didn't see that. Thank you, Councillor Pavia. Please, Councillor Wright, my apologies, I missed you from the screen in the chamber.
That's okay, don't worry about it. I was just wondering, I know there's a number of us councillors who are Welsh learners, myself included, and the staff training that's offered to help people learn Welsh, is that open to councillors as well? And also, are there any plans, I'm sorry if I missed this, are there any plans for it to return to in-person rather than online?
Yeah, thanks. A really important question. Yes. So in response to the first one, absolutely, that's open to staff and members. We want to do everything we can to help as many people as possible. And the other things we've run in the past, particularly when more people are in County Hall, are things like lunchtime Welsh conversation classes, just to help people encourage you can go along with your lunch and chat to others and practice Welsh. The intention is, in recognition of the reasons people haven't been learning, to introduce, probably we're looking sort of from September time, in-person opportunities. What we would say as well, if there are external opportunities outside the council that people have identified, which could be through our own community education service or elsewhere, we are absolutely delighted to support and sort of fund courses elsewhere as well. The key thing for us is to get as many people speaking the language as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Wright, and apologies again, and entirely my fault for missing. I'll watch out for these little yellow hands more carefully. Moving on to Councillor Pavia with a question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Matt, for presenting the paper. If we look at translations, then I'll sort of kick off on that. You've obviously highlighted £22,000 uplift in terms of translation costs, taking the budget to 81,000, but you've obviously highlighted that this budget is going to forecast overspend. So just obviously understanding what interventions are going to be put in place, obviously to deal with that overspend, both this financial year and then obviously forecasting for future financial years as we go into the budget rounds in the autumn, winter. In terms of tendering and commissioning for those for those translation services, we obviously, it sounds like we've got a long-established connection with some business there. So just understanding how that tendering and commissioning is done, is that up for review? Obviously, with our partnership with Cardiff in terms of procurement, is that something that they're helping us on, looking obviously for the best providers in the market, because obviously with technology it doesn't necessarily need to be business doesn't necessarily need to be in the authority area or in the region. It could be anywhere in Wales now or beyond Welsh borders. Do we do any small in-house stuff ourselves in terms of translation? I'm obviously conscious of obviously quality and standards, and we've got the capacity to do that, to ensure that's done to the appropriate level. And then obviously finally looking at engagement with other local authorities. Do any other local authorities, particularly within our region, do they share any translation services, any back office services in translation? Is that something that we've looked at? Particularly, I'm just thinking the likes of, I don't know, Caerphilly, Blaen y Gwent, where you may have, obviously stronger communities there in the valleys areas, and they've probably got a bigger in-house provision than we have. Is that something that we've looked at in terms of collaboration? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much for the questions, Councillor Pavia. So a few things there. In terms of the overspend, this is always a tricky one, and I'll sort of answer it in hand with some of your later questions, because obviously there's an interrelation there. We have a legal duty to translate things, so where the demand is there, we have to translate them. We can't cut corners. So that means in terms of my overall budget area that I'm responsible for as head of service, I have a responsibility to live within the budget set by council. So we've, in a number of years, to give an example of how we've made up some of that overspend, our Welsh language officer actually retired in an election year. We've had a slight gaps, which meant we were saving salary for a period of time. Now, in most years, we wouldn't be able to do that, but because it was election year, because of the pre-election period, a number of things weren't going out in the same pace as they normally would have done. It doesn't stop our translation service working or any of the statutory requirements, so we sort of nibbled a little bit of the budget back there, but clearly I'm responsible then for making savings in other areas to ensure we can keep meeting our statutory requirements under the Welsh language and still come in on budget, which I'm pleased to say when you scrutinise the budget monitoring later, you will see that my budget area has come in under budget, so we've achieved that. In terms of the overall commissioning, we produced, or we looked at this, probably about 2.5 to 3 years ago. We do this on a regular basis to see whether our arrangements are cost effective compared to the alternative. The system we have in place, unlike other organisations or a number of others, we don't have in-house translation. We use a stable of 6 or 7 small translators around Wales, who then we're able to sort of manage the workload of those. Our intelligence is, and I remain confident in this, that the rates we pay or we are charged per word are incredibly competitive compared to the alternatives. We did look at another authority providing our translation services for us and increasing the number of staff they retained in-house. But it came in at £30,000 to £40,000 a year more expensive than our current setup. We also spoke to procurement colleagues as to whether there was value in going out to the market. Given the size of the contract and the amount of potential savings, which were actually, I think their sense was that the contracts out there were not going to yield sufficient value to go out to the market. But it is something that we will keep under constant review. But just to be clear, we don't have a monopoly with any one provider or closed shop. We just use a stable of small businesses around Wales. But unfortunately, we have sort of ruled out in-house translation because the number of people we would need to employ, and obviously then you're having to deal with holiday cover and so on. So that approach has been found to work for an organisation of our size. You also mentioned the technology. And this was one of the reasons we considered it bringing in-house. We thought with the technology that's there now and automation, would it be worthwhile bringing in-house? What we find is a lot of those individual businesses we use are using software and translation tools which learn certain types. You upload a committee meeting, gradually the software learns how to construct, and it still needs a human to work through it. But a lot of those will be using that sort of software, which in turn enables them to keep their costs down. And we've actually found, we haven't seen huge rises in costs, even over the last 6, 7, 8 years. So, technology is deployed, but deployed by individual translators. And the final one, we don't tend to do any in-house. There are small, occasional things like proofreading. And, for example, I know that Nia, in her old job, colleagues in community hubs would sometimes go to Nia and say, we've had this back. Before we put this poster up, can you just give that a read through and check? But, for the most part, we have translators that can turn things around in half an hour to an hour where it's urgent. So we haven't had the need for staff to do that.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Pavio, did you have any other?
I have got some others, but I'm happy to come back. I'll let other councillors take a swing.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. Councillor Chandler.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Matt. Very interesting report. I just wanted to give a bit more clarity on the employees, the breakdown in the report of Welsh language schools of employees, not including school-based staff. What's the total number of staff in each service area? Does that include everybody? I mean, is there a stage before beginner where we've got people that have not started on their Welsh language journey? So that's my first question. And in which case, it would be helpful, I think, if those figures in that table then not just were the actual numbers of staff, but also were the percentages of staff within each of those service areas. And then the second part of the question is just looking at the improvement that's happened over the last year. How much of that is improvement of the language skills of existing staff who are moving up that ladder of fluency, and how much of that is just purely through new recruitment of new staff?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Chandler. In relation, thanks for the comment. I don't have those numbers to hand on staffing in individual departments, but I think that is something I can get for you. And in light of that question, I think something we'll look to include in future iterations of this report to improve its usability for members. I think since last year, one of the big sort of improvements we've seen has been in recruitment of some of the the external staff. There have been people gaining more qualifications, but to give a very practical example, the way technology has enabled us to work means we're recruiting people from different parts of Wales, and people don't necessarily need to be living locally, which gives us the ability. You know, I know, for example, we have people living much further afield that may only need to travel to County Hall occasionally. So actually, we're pulling in more employees from North Wales and West Wales. And I think it's a mix of things. The other aspect with that is trying to target our recruitment at different areas. And I don't want to pretend we're there yet in terms of this. There's some of the things we've been doing. So again, to give a practical example, we had vacancies in home care. Now, Alan Burkett, who was our Welsh language officer at the time, he actually went on Radio Cymru and did a piece there to say, look, you know, we're struggling. This is really important. People receiving care who are Welsh speakers have a right to receive care in Welsh. And just went on to Radio Cymru, did a little interview to try to encourage Welsh speakers to apply and consider a career in Monmouthshire. But it does remain a challenge, and because we haven't seen as many people taking up courses in the last couple of years, because perhaps of the pandemic and the reasons I mentioned, we haven't seen the gains we would like. But absolutely key to this is advertising more jobs as Welsh essential, particularly in those frontline positions. The more Welsh essential jobs we can get advertised, the more Welsh speakers, fluent Welsh speakers, we're going to bring into the organisation.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Chandler, are you happy with that response? Thank you. Councillor Pavey, did you say you had another question?
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just picking up on workforce, Matt, and obviously, you know, you referenced the new strategy and obviously the drive not just to increase the ability and capacity within the staff cohort, both you know, in terms of education and non-education staff, but obviously to develop greater capacity with around education and demand from the obviously the children's level, and obviously building that through. But in terms of our ability to recruit and retain, and you said obviously in terms of recruitment that's a challenge, and you know, you're continuing to be proactive and refine that work. Have we got any intelligence as to why we can't recruit? Is it just because of our geographical position? Is there some perception out there with the workforce that, you know, we don't, as an authority, we don't take, you know, the language seriously, or, you know, we're such a low benchmark that, you know, it's not worth, you know, we're not an authority worth bothering with. Is it salary? You know, obviously that's touching on potentially another issue, but, you know, what are the drivers that are preventing people from coming? On the, I suppose, just following on from Councillor Chandler's question, understanding that breakdown of numbers of those Welsh speakers, those who are sort of front of house service, and those that are not. And obviously, I've had engagement with a really able and talented legal advisor, Geraint Thomas, who's recently come into the authority. As I said, really able, but again, he's behind the scenes. You know, he's obviously providing a really important service for the authority, but he's not front of house. And then, obviously, following on from that and touching on the example you gave there about care service, obviously more than just words, really important national strategy. Are we able to deliver, you know, those services to those people who want a Welsh care service, you know, whether that's domiciliary care or whatever? Are we able to deliver that at present? Thanks.
Yeah, again, thanks for the questions. To start with the point of challenge, It's not unique to Monmouthshire. It is something, and we fed this back to the Commissioner, because we do have a very good relationship with the Welsh Language Commissioner's officer. We go down and sit with the Commissioner and the Commissioner's officers and surface some of these issues. And I think it's a challenge for public services in South East Wales, because we just simply do not have in huge numbers fluent Welsh speakers in relation to other parts of Wales. And one of the things we've found, so in our part of the world, is a lot of the Welsh speakers coming into the organisation. You mentioned our employment solicitor, who's been incredibly helpful actually in this work on the standards as well. And he's worked with us on those. We see a lot of Welsh speakers coming into higher level professional positions. And what you tend to find in a lot of cases, people coming who are bilingual can often be high achievers, and they're not necessarily then in frontline positions. So, and if we look at even areas like home care, for example, which you mentioned, the difficulties of providing home care, we have huge recruitment challenges in home care anyway. So it's not as though we're overflowing with numbers of people applying for these jobs at the best of time, and many people will commute in from outside of the area for these home care jobs. It's the very nature of the cost of properties in Monmouthshire relative to the wage levels available. So we're not getting feedback that Monmouthshire itself is a barrier, and we're doing everything we can to actively sort of promote this as a place where Welsh language is part of everyday life. But again, we do have those challenges. Some things we haven't done actively yet that we will need to do, and some of the challenges for Nia as she starts this role are going into schools, things like careers evenings into Welsh language schools, to say to people, have you thought about a career in public service? And trying to get them at a much earlier stage and develop those people into some of the entry-level positions. Things like growing our Welsh language activity on LinkedIn or careers websites to actually just remind people who want to use Welsh as part of their job and who are Welsh speakers that actually this is a really good place to come, and where you can thrive, and where the language is encouraged in everyday life, and where we have real aspirations to grow its use in public services. So not an easy one, but we're determined to try a whole range of tactics to make us a more attractive employer to Welsh speakers.
Thanks, sir. Just to come back up, I agree with that, and where obviously we're struggling with recruitment, growing your own in-house is really important. Obviously, developing staff proficiency right across the piece, and it goes back, I think, to Councillor Wright's initial question. How can we regenerate that face-to-face learning work again? But just in terms of, just going back to the care piece, if the care assessment is done and the request is to have care provision in the medium of Welsh, can we deliver? Are we delivering that? Can we deliver that?
We can deliver it. We do have Welsh language care assistants. I don't have the numbers to hand, but it's a key part of someone's dignity, of their life. And, we often see this, particularly with people we've had examples, dementia sufferers, for example, that are much, much happier communicating in Welsh, and even where it was the language of their childhood. It's strange the way the brain works. But, I think we always go back, and we did have that instance where we were struggling, and we deployed, Alan went on to Radio Cymru, so we will do everything we can to get those in. Our worst case scenario in that is we're really struggling, and we would need to perhaps pay a market premium to bring someone in to meet a specific care need.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. Councillor Keir.
Thank you, Chair. Matt, thanks very much for the the presentation of this report. It's very enlightening for me as a new county councillor. Just two very quick questions. Are we speaking to other authorities with regards to perhaps best practices? I was tempted to try and throw that question out to Nia, but probably a bit too early for that. And secondly, what in-house promotion is there going on with regards to the staff, particularly when you say that the number of training courses has declined? And I hear what you say about staff wanting or preferring possibly face-to-face. Is there in-house promotion of this ability to be trained?
Yes, there is, through things like the SharePoint Online, so our intranet site. So we have a Welsh language page there, the sort of courses published on Talent Lab. But I think, as you asked that question, the fact that we don't have enough people doing those courses suggests that we would benefit from doing more, and just continuing to push that through places like the digital coach. So, for example, our Welsh language officer would occasionally sort of go on to the digital coach. Things like Shemai Day, just using those opportunities to encourage the language to talk about the courses we have available. But absolutely, we've got some. I'm so delighted to have sort of Nia with us today, because I had the privilege of sitting in on Nia's interview, or appointing Nia, and to hear some of the ideas she has for the language, the enthusiasm for the language, and her desire that I know that in the coming months you're going to see a real stepping up of activity and promotion of really encouraging as many staff as possible to start learning the language and increasing their skills. So absolutely, it is available, but we can and need to do more, because the numbers are not where they need to be at the moment. In terms of the question of engaging with other authorities, there is a Welsh language officers network which we are part of, and we also engage through the Welsh Local Government Association. So yeah, we do seek to learn from best practice. We are a smaller organisation than many others, so in terms of the team we have, like in all areas of business, we are probably slightly thinner than some other authorities would be. And what we have to do with that is make sure that we're using those resources well and effectively, but so absolutely learning from what others are doing and seeking to replicate those. But equally, there are areas where others will look to us. So, for example, there are a number of organisations that approach us for translation services, because actually our approach to translation is very good. And there are a number of local sort of voluntary organisations we do that for as well, and some of those people like Citizens Advice. We do the translations for Citizens Advice, because we can do that in a far more cost-effective way than anyone else would be able to for them. So yeah, absolutely open to learning.
Thank you, Councillor Keir. Matt, just a couple of questions. I'd like to link the issues in the report concerning the importance of attracting people into the authority with a Welsh capability, a Welsh commitment. And I should say that I'm about the worst advocate, in the sense that I'm married to a Welsh lady who also teaches modern languages, including Welsh. And my Welsh is absolutely hopeless compared to our children who've learned it and my wife. So I'm going to make a fresh commitment to do something about putting that right too. But I do wonder also if we can link this to the wider issue of the difficulty of recruiting staff to other key areas of the council, such as in social care. But there are other really important areas that it's clear there are difficulties. I just wonder to what extent you feel that the requirement expressed in recruitment to potential employees, we share a border with England, as well as with neighbours in Wales, that may deter some excellent employees from saying, I'll come to work in these key roles in Monmouthshire, and I just wondered if you had a sense of to what extent that is an issue, and if I may also ask if separately that we might want to be more proactive with our members of staff and indeed councillors by potentially doing, as you open up your laptop for the day or your computer for the day, having a word of the day or a phrase of the day in Welsh, and kind of engaging it in that sort of active way that is difficult to avoid because it's the first thing that might come up on your screen when we open up for the day, and over a period of time, you know, word for the day. And so I wonder if that would be an application that we could consider. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thanks. Absolutely. I think anything we can do. I think we may have limitations on the pop-ups at the beginning of the day because we've tried that for something else. But I'll have a chat to the digital team and see what's feasible there. But there will be other ways in which we can do that, and little things like promoting apps like Duolingo, which is a really good way to learn a language and tends to nag you in the morning or whatever your normal time of day is if you're not doing your Welsh learning. You know, in terms of the general difficulties of recruiting staff, again, there is no easy answer to this. I think we can benefit in many ways as almost the gateway to Wales, because we might find that lots of people that have jobs in Bristol or the west of England and want to stay living in Wales because they can speak the language actually may choose to live in Monmouthshire and sort of commute out. So we get more, potentially we could get more Welsh speakers in that way. And we have some really active Welsh language groups, conversation groups that meet, and we work to support those as well, to try and make sure that people that want to use the language, that might be considering moving into the area for work, recognise this is a healthy place for the language and somewhere the language can thrive. And I think we've been able to capitalise on the legacy of holding the Eisteddfod in Abergavenny back in 2016, which was a huge boost for the language. But you're absolutely right, Councillor. There are significant challenges in that area, and recruitment challenges are not unique to our Welsh speakers. They are experienced by departments across the county.
Thank you, Matt, and for also the comprehensive nature of the report. There are, I think, one or two areas there that would be useful for follow-up, and we'll perhaps pick some of them up at the end of the meeting. I'd like us to, if we may, move on with the agenda. I'm conscious also of time and how colleagues on the committee would feel about this. We could either pause for a comfort break for 5 or 10 minutes, or we could carry on, and recognising that people could take a comfort break during the course of the meeting if you'd so prefer. Could I suggest that we continue, and if you need a comfort break, that we all recognise that nature needs must be followed and so on. So we'll carry on if that's okay. Great, thank you. I'm seeing nods from around the chamber and online. So we'll move on to the revenue capital outturn, and again, this is an area which we could really get buried in the many pages and details of this. It's good to also be able to welcome those online who have not met Jonathan Davis. I just met Jonathan ahead of this meeting, and Jonathan is the Assistant Director, have I got that right?
Assistant
Head of Finance, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but do we need to move the recommendations from the previous report, please? So I move the recommendations, and that we accept this very interesting and big report. Thank you very much.
Councillor Webb, thank you very much indeed, and you're absolutely right, and I appreciate your bringing me up to task.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I'm very grateful you did. Thank you very much indeed. Super. So we'll move on to item 8, the revenue capital outturn, and it's just to I think, highlight that this has been an absolutely extraordinary period of time. We all know this from our general lives, but in terms of managing the finance in the course of 2021 and 2022. I just want to really thank the officers who have done a really excellent job in bringing the finances through. It's been an extremely challenging thing to have achieved, and I know that's been working alongside councillors and working across the whole organisation. But I just wanted to start this section by offering thanks to the very effective work in doing this. I know we have a number of questions in regard to this. I was going to suggest, and I don't know, Jonathan or Peter, whether you'd be covering off the questions. The expectation is that the reports have been read, and therefore it's difficult for you to offer anything particularly in a summary that doesn't delve into a lot of the detail. But if there were any overall points you wanted to flag up, we'll move straight into the questions if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Yes, Jonathan Davis, Assistant Head of Finance at Monmouthshire, with responsibility for financial reporting. I think taking the cue there, Chair, in terms of sticking to the key issues. I'm not intending to go through any of the detail this morning, but just to give some headlines, I guess, in terms of the report that's in front of you today. This is the 2021-22 outturn position for revenue, capital and reserves. It feels like quite a long time ago, probably for some of our finance teams now. Things are moving at pace, and we're certainly moving on and dealing with new year issues. But this report does provide some important context to the issues that we continue to face. In terms of a headline level, it's a really positive outcome. There's a surplus position of 5.6 million prior to transfers to reserves. That's given us an ability to strengthen our reserve coverage and provide financial resilience to the authority moving forward. I think it's fair to say we've had unprecedented support from Welsh Government in respect of funding. They actually reopened the settlement for the year, which is unheard of. Certainly never happened since I've been with the authority. And we had a huge amount of grant support late in the year. I think local government as a sector recognises that contribution from Welsh Government, and the continuing strong relationships we have with them through the WLGA and up into the finance departments there at Welsh Government. In terms of the main variances, they're there in the report for you to see. I won't go into those, and I'm sure we'll have some questions around them. What that funding does, that additional funding is probably mask some of those structural budget deficits that we continue to have, and some of those pressures. I'll touch on those briefly shortly. One of the key issues, I think, for members of the committee is just recognising the amount of Welsh Government hardship funding that we again received during the year. So that was upwards of £16 million again. That fund ended at the 31st of March. Whilst the funding ended, those impacts of the pandemic, the latent demand that's there continues, and that's one of the key risks that we're going to have to deal with as we move into the new financial year. I mentioned reserves. Yes, it's allowed us to improve financial resilience going forward. It'll allow us to focus on maybe making some modest investment, but I think that investment has to be effective, it has to be efficient, and it has to align with the risks that we face going forward, and obviously the key political aspirations moving forward. I mentioned those risks. I'll touch upon them briefly. I know they're covered in the report, but I mentioned those underlying budget deficits, those demands that are coming on stream in terms of services, social care. They benefited hugely in year from one-off funding, over nearly £2.5 million. we are seeing continued pressure in terms of our residential placements now. Domiciliary care in terms of those staffing pressures that we've perhaps heard about already, and also we've got ongoing children's complex needs, not just from a result of the pandemic. They're a feature of that budget as we go through the financial year. The wider economic environment, I probably don't need to speak too much to members on this, but we are seeing huge impacts in terms of inflation, both pay and non-pay. Contract handbacks in terms of our PTU service is causing us huge issues. And I think, as I mentioned, some of those latent demands resulting from the pandemic in terms of homelessness, pressure on our income levels in terms of leisure and car parks. We have to recognise, and I think there's a section in the report there around the wider cost of living crisis in our communities. That is going to be a key feature as we move into the new financial year. We have to recognise that and look to support our communities. So I think, Chair, I'll leave that as the key issues, but just to summarise, I guess, for members of the committee, this outturn has to be viewed positively. The Welsh Government support has been integral to ending in that position positively and increasing our financial resilience. But we need to be mindful of those headwinds that I've mentioned there, both in terms of the funding dropping off and also that demand and the wider economy. Welsh Government have made it clear that the improved settlement for the new financial year includes an expectation on local authorities that a lot of those pressures, those COVID legacy demands will be met from that funding. So I think we have to recognise that whilst we've been able to strengthen reserves and improve resilience, there's an expectancy on us as an authority and for all the authorities in Wales to meet some of those pressures now going forward following the pandemic period. So Chair, I'm happy to take questions. I've got a couple of the finance team on the call as well today. I'm conscious that this is a report that covers pretty much every area of the authority. I'm not going to have all of those answers for you today. So I'll leave it there, and thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'll open it to questions, if I may. Councillor Chandler.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jonathan. Obviously, yeah, there's a lot to go through in that report, and I've got a few questions. Some are larger than others. I suppose the first is just looking ahead. You've highlighted clearly there are future funding or future challenges in terms of service delivery and risks related to that. So one of my questions is there a little bit more of a detailed set of assessments of likely scenarios around different things that we could look at in terms of what those risks might be? I'm thinking, you've talked about service pressures because of cost of living crisis, but I'm also thinking about inflationary pressures, because inflation is something that's growing perhaps a little more rapidly than many of us have anticipated, and I think those are going to put pressures on both the services that we buy in, but also pressure from staff in terms of wage increases. So there's going to be issues there. So a little bit more of a detail looking ahead. Looking more for the looking back at this past year for the report, I'm just as concerned about some of the underspends as I am about the overspends, because clearly we don't want an overspend, but we don't want underspends either, because that means that we're not delivering the services that we set out to deliver. So there's a couple of particular ones that I wanted to ask about in terms of big figure ones. Highways management and flooding, £500,000 underspend. That's quite a lot. There's not really an explanation other than staff shortages about why that's occurred, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what the impact of that is. And similarly, we've also got a surplus of £1 million in strategic initiatives, but again, there's no indication of what strategic initiatives are. Is it a bit of a a sort of a catch-all miscellaneous for big figure areas there. So some explanation on that would be good. And then finally, I just got a question a little bit about terminology. We talk about savings an awful lot, cost savings. Do we mean savings as in we set out to save that money, or do we mean underspends that we didn't want to incur? So I just pick out one as an example. In the children and young people area, we talk about staff cost savings in the psychology service of £20,000. Small figure, I'm not worried about the figure, but highlighting that as a cost savings, that means that we set out to save that money. If so, I would be quite concerned that at a time of pandemic, of lockdown and children's mental health and recover from that, that we were saving money on the school psychology service. Would it be better phrased as an underspend that was unfortunate as well as unforeseen? So those are some of my three main areas of question.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. And Jonathan.
Yes, thank you, Councillor, for those questions. I think taking them in turn, in terms of some of those risks going forward, there is some detail in the report around these, but a lot of these would have been known at our budget setting stage, and we certainly did a full analysis of those risks at that stage. Obviously, as I mentioned at the start of the paper, things do move at pace, and some of those inflationary pressures may not have been apparent at that time. So these are things that we are having to respond to quite quickly as things develop. In terms of how these are brought to the attention of the committee and to members, the financial reporting for the following financial year will follow. There will be a formal month 4 report coming through the committee cycle in September, which will talk to some of those risks that are coming forward and playing out for this financial year. In terms of those main risks, you asked for a bit more detail on them. I think we highlighted them at a headline level in the report under section 3.28. I don't think they will come as any surprise to members. We are still seeing structural budget deficits in respect of the demands placed on our social care service. I think I mentioned as I went through the report, we're now going into a position with some of our care sector that capacity in our care homes is getting towards 100%. So we're having to fund some of those placements, which we weren't having to do during the pandemic. So it's a switch in focus for us. And in domiciliary care, some of those staffing issues are a key feature of the service, and the external support that we're having to get in to support that service. I mentioned some of those legacy impacts, and homelessness is one of those key areas. And I think if there was one area that was maybe keeping finance teams up at night at the moment, it's that homelessness area. It's a key policy change for Welsh Government. And there's still a lot of detail for us to work through in terms of how we look to support that as a service moving forward. So I think I've probably cleared off the first question, Councillor. Moving on to some of those underspends. I'll come back to the highways ones in a second. I may ask my colleague Dave Loader to come on for that one. You mentioned £1 million underspend in strategic initiatives. That's a corporate budget that we hold. But the £1 million there is specifically a late grant that we received from Welsh Government to support our difficulty in council tax collection during the year. In terms of why it's there in strategic initiatives, it has to go somewhere. We can't put it against council tax, and we have to keep that separate to be able to report that transparently. Just moving on to the terms of budget savings. And I think you're right to highlight the wording, Councillor. When we talk of budget savings or mitigations, we're primarily talking about those which have been brought forward prior to the start of the financial year, and which services have come forward with efficiencies or mitigations that they feel can be made within their services. I think as you'll realise, over the past 10 to 12 years, we've been in a position of having to take, facing pressures, budgetary pressures, and having to make some savings within services during a period of austerity. So those budget savings that are outlined there in Table 2, those are savings that the services have brought forward themselves as potential mitigations to the pressures we're facing. In specific answer to your question around children's service there, that was due to a staff vacancy that we were carrying, and the service was realigned just to take account of that, so that budget saving in effect was offered up. But you're quite right that when we talk of budget savings, sometimes we can get a little bit conflated with talking around underspends. But I think in terms of underspends, we're talking about what's happened during the year to the budget set, rather than those budget savings or mitigations that were agreed at the start of the year. Dave, I don't know if you can come in maybe on the highways underspend, just to give a bit more context around that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Dave Loader, Finance Manager within Central Finance. You're right, Councillor Chandler, it is a very large underspend, over £500,000. It is made up of two parts. Savings on staffing. This particular area has got a large number of staff vacancies, or did have a large number of staff vacancies last financial year. They are actively looking to fill those posts. I think actually, if you look on the job board, there are a number of highways posts on there. So that created quite a large underspend within our staffing. But we did have high levels of income last year as well, which was a little bit of a spike in years, if you look at it on trend. Made up of two parts mainly. We were able to recharge more staff costs to fees, to capital budgets, and to grants. But we also had a large increase in road closure income. That wasn't communicated to finance until late in the year. Basically, our road closure income doubled to what it usually is. So that created a large spike in our income. So very large underspend last year. I doubt it's going to be anywhere near that this year, because obviously the posts will be filled, and we think the road closure income was just a one-off windfall. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dave and Jonathan.
Could I just,
Councillor Chandler, yes.
Just to follow up on that.
Yes, Councillor Chandler.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thank you for those explanations. That's good. I just, I suppose it's from sticking with, say, using the highways management and flooding as an example, not just as the only instance. But I know this is a financial report and we're looking at financial outturns, but I suppose where we're seeing there are significant variances from budget, it would be useful to have a commentary as well in terms of what is the impact been on services, and to what extent, if yes, so there was a lot of staff vacancies as an explanation of why there was an underspend in highways and flooding, but what has that actually meant for our highways and flooding programme, and what actual actions were taken to mitigate that drop in service level during this period?
Jonathan, maybe that some of that requires a written response if you need to do so at a later stage, but if you're able to address it now, that'd be great, John.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor, for the follow-up on that. I think in terms of that impact on the service, I think within Appendix 1 to the report, the director of the service does look to provide a wider commentary on the impact on the service during the year. I appreciate that it may not go into that level of detail, maybe around some of those areas that you rightly have looked at there. But I think, yes, Chair, I think it's a fair point that certainly the head of service or those responsible for that service would have a better indication on the impact or the ongoing impact that underspend could have. So I think, yeah, it's one of those areas we may not necessarily have the answer today.
So could I, sorry, Peter.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to introduce myself, Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive. I'm the Council Section 151 Officer. Yeah, just to, I guess, offer a view, and I guess aided by the changes that we've seen in the Scrutiny Committee structure going into the new administration. So in terms of where I'm sat right now, in terms of the Performance and Overview Committee, and to Councillor Chandler's question, having, I guess, front and centre scrutiny focus on both the finance reports as much as the performance reports, that allows that joined up observation by way of scrutiny, and to see, in effect, some of the yin and yang of the challenges faced both with availability of budget, to John's point, circumstances and events that occur that are somewhat out of our control, and obviously the grapple therefore, and then for leadership in terms of making sure that we're delivering good performance through our services. So I think just in terms of matters that you might sort of highlight and raise that beyond what John's just touched on, doesn't go into probably the level of detail that you would want in terms of following that through, then it should, if there is a result and an underlying issue, then it should feature within the performance reports. I just wanted to if I may, Chair, just sort of offer a quick comment, which is just a couple of things contextually. So a reflection back on last year. I don't need to repeat everything that's John said because he's framed it, as always, perfectly. But I think we just need to recognise that as we went through the financial year, to the Chair's earlier comment, a couple of strange years, to put it mildly. But we were facing in the earlier reporting months some pretty significant overspend. We did not have a line of sight at that point as an organisation on the level of very significant windfall grants that we then subsequently and latterly received by Welsh Government. And clearly, as a leadership team with the then Cabinet, we applied the brakes in terms of making sure that, we were not spending needlessly. But, you've got to take conscious decisions in that regard. So, where you are able to realise savings, where potentially you hold vacancies, but where you've assessed the impact of holding that vacancy, all of those decisions are taken into due consideration, because to your point, Councillor Chandler, you've still got to deliver services and perform well. So all of those judgments were made through the year, and then subsequently we had the wave of grants come in, and I guess John ultimately sort of captures where we've ended up in terms of the outturn position. The final point is around the current year, so let's talk about the current year. It gets confusing when you're dealing with last year, this year, and budgeting into next year. But when we're talking about the current year in terms of 22-23, because I think this context will just assist the committee, the chair. So to John's points around the budgetary risks, the pressures that we face, they're listed and itemized in the report. And to this point, just to repeat it for the point of repeating it, you know, we will be undertaking and are undertaking current assessments of those risks beyond what we did at budget setting stage. They will come through in the month four report. What am I expecting? I'm expecting a challenging position at month 4. I think I'd put it at that. But bear in mind, when we set the budget for the current year, coming off the back of outturn, we knew of those issues of homelessness risk, issues with income shortfall in leisure centres, the issues within social care. We made sure that we put aside, and we have put aside reserve cover even before the outturn position you're looking at, to make sure that we've got the backbone of reserve cover to be brought in to offset some of those known risks. The issue will be the unknown risks, the emerging risks, the ones that are coming off the back of the cost of living crisis. Inflation will manifest its way in different ways through our business just because of the nature of what a local authority is. So some of those things we may get a weather eye on now. Some of those things may take quite a while to work through the system. So hopefully that's helpful, Chair, and to the committee. It's just something contextual within the confines of the report that you're looking at.
Thank you, Peter. And you know, it is worth bearing in mind that this is a retrospective look at the pandemic impacts as much as anything, and we're now working in a new level of impacts from cost of living crisis, the impacts on fuel, and the invasion of Ukraine that will, I'm sure, as Peter says, present us with some difficult to create the absolute scenarios just now. Jonathan, thanks for that. I'll move on with questions, if I may, to Councillor Pavia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm going to sort of drill down on education. So I know I can see Nikki's on the call. Obviously, our schools did very well out of the two predominant COVID years. We've got schools there with carrying significant reserves. Not just in secondary schools, but some of those primary school reserves are significantly high. So just understand, Nikki, towards the end of obviously the last financial year, how far advanced are those investment plans with the various schools that have been identified? How are they being enabled to realise those plans? Second question, I suppose, goes on the back of what we've just spoken about now in terms of vacancies. And I'm not going to rehearse everything that's just been said, but I know in one of the areas in terms of maintenance and obviously supporting our schools either through advice or through direct commissioning to enable them to discharge some of that funding. There's been a challenge in that department in terms of not enough capacity or backlogs to enable schools to develop those plans. So do we? And I suppose this particular one could be for either Peter or Jonathan in terms of the end of year data for vacancies. Do we capture that right across the corporate piece? Have we got vacancies per department, and what would that be realised in terms of headline figure? Is that something you could provide the committee?
I'll come in there. I'll save John trying to navigate that one. The data in terms of specific vacancies is something that is overseen by within Matt Phillips's portfolio, within colleagues sat within HR. That can certainly be captured in its varieties of analyses and made available. And I'm sure in any event that will be a matter of interest for the committee regardless moving forward, both in terms of vacancies and challenges of recruitment and retention. So yeah, that can certainly be done, and also just a point to just make clearly, I think as we all know, but just stating the bleeding obvious, vacancies come and vacancies go. So when you or the committee is looking to ask for that information, just be clear in terms of what you're asking for. If you're asking for a snapshot position or otherwise. Because a position at the end of March can be very different to the position today, could be different to the position in September. So, but certainly, yeah, we can look to get that information brought together and made available.
Thank you. Councillor Pavia, did you have any other question?
No, just obviously for Nikki to come in terms of those school investment plans. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. Thank you, Chair. Just by way of introduction, I'm Nikki Wellington. I'm the Support Services Manager for Children and Young People, so covering finance amongst a number of other things. In terms of the investment plans and the schools at the moment, obviously the schools received a number of grants towards the end of the year that they have been allowed to move over into the current financial year to spend on raising standards, maintenance, etc., etc. We have been working with our schools to produce 3-year budgets, and these 3-year budgets are effectively the investment plans looking at the spend over the next 3 years. So with all of our schools, we have the current financial 22-23 budget in place, and that's been signed off by the governing body. And with the majority of our schools, we have a 3-year budget plan in place to ensure that the money is spent appropriately in line with the grants and in line with the terms and conditions of that income. Equally so, with the one school that is in a deficit, we have a recovery plan in place that we are monitoring against that. So we monitor the majority of our schools on a monthly basis, if not on a bi-monthly basis, to ensure that those plans are met. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikki. Councillor Pavia, are you comfortable with that?
Just to come back on that, and thanks, Nikki. In terms of the issue I raised around maintenance support, is that something that you foresee to be a challenge over the next year or two? Obviously, you say it in terms of obviously looking over the 3-year budget cycles for the majority of our schools. But is that capacity issue something that's going to hinder the realisation of those investment plans, particularly in terms of maintenance?
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. Yeah, in terms of the main, I mean, the grants were given for a number of things. Some were for raising standards within schools, which obviously won't impact on any maintenance. The maintenance grant that has come in, yes, there is a concern that obviously with the capacity, not only within our own internal workforce, but with contractors in the wider area, that capacity is an issue. We know that across the industry. So I think it's just a case that we're going to have to work very closely with schools to programme in when those works can be done, and to ensure that what's reflected in their budgets is timely. The one thing about the maintenance grant was that it doesn't have to be spent by the 31st of March 2023. So there is some time around that we can work with schools to ensure that money is spent.
That's very helpful to know. Councillor Pavia, are you comfortable with that? Thank you. Councillor Bond, I didn't see your digital hand up, but I thought I saw you raising your hand. Did you have a question, Councillor Bond?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for the comprehensive documents, and the questions and answers so far have been really interesting and informative. Thank you, everyone. It was said that the foreseen issues versus the budget ongoing are homelessness, leisure and social care. I wonder about also the assets, and perhaps a change of behaviour and a change of the way we shop and everything, particularly around Spitty Park and Castlegate, and the fact that it's been supported by Welsh Government COVID-19 over the last 2 years, and that's why we've broken even, or at least done okay. So wonder whether there's any creative plans or forecasts to cover any ongoing risk of reduced use of the parks and the park and the Spitty and Castlegate, please.
Thank you, and Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm picking this question up for the reasons of the fact that my portfolio covers not just finance, but landlord services and the development team within which that sits within that, and oversees within landlord services the acquisitions that you refer to. So those investment assets, much like many investment assets across this sector, public sector and private sector, were clearly impacted during the COVID period. Laudable, I guess, that Welsh Government extended its use of the COVID hardship fund to be able to offset the losses that we encountered during that period. But I guess a point of reflection back, I think, which is one around drawing a distinction between our investment in Castlegate Business Park and Newport Leisure Park. So Castlegate Business Park, the occupancy levels there remained very strong through the pandemic. It was not really impacted at all by it. Certainly, if you reflect on lockdowns and the impact that those had during those 2 years. Newport Leisure Park, clearly, given the nature of the tenants operating there, they were impacted from lockdown. They had to close, and therefore there was consequential impact. And clearly, we needed to make sure that we held those tenants secure. And we were able to do that by the fact that Welsh Government was obviously allowing us to claim for the lost income through the COVID hardship fund. We are beyond lockdown now. Those tenants are operating, and they are operating well. And clearly we will continue to assess that, and we do that through the investment committee when we bring performance updates back through the investment committee. I guess the final point to make was that there was, during the early stages of budget setting for 22-23, there was an identified risk around Castlegate Business Park. One of the anchor tenants there gave notice, Mitel. It's known about publicly. We have, of late, successfully secured the expansion of an existing tenant into much of that space. So, again, in terms of those investments continuing to perform and perform well, they are. And just a reminder, I think, often misunderstood, that they are contributing, a level of significant net income to the council, and that in turn allows us to sustain and support the delivery of services. So hopefully that is useful, just by way of rounded input.
Thank you, Peter. And Councillor Keir.
Thank you, Chair. Peter, just following up from this bit of a technical term, for those two parks, where are we on the WALTs on it? For those who don't know, the weighted average unexpired lease terms for those?
Okay, that's a question I haven't got at my fingertips. I can certainly get a response to you on that, Councillor Keir. I'll have to lift that from within landlord services, if that's okay.
That's no problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keir. And if I may, just a couple of quick questions. The pandemic has brought challenges, but we've also now got 2 years of experience of working with the pandemic. And I'd be very interested to understand what the impact on our finances would have been in the 21-22 year if the additional exceptional funding had not been introduced into the authority, to have a better sight of where we may be and what pressure points we may be having moving forward. And I don't know whether that would be possible without a huge piece of work.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Chair, I'll come in on that. with a bit of a broad statement. It's quite hard not to attach a swear word to probably the sentiment as a Section 151 officer back in March, April, May, June of 2020, when, yeah, staring down the barrel, I think, is probably the use of the words I'd probably apply to it. Because to what we've now seen, that John's referred to, that's included in the report, and that John in the report is just the second year of our draw on the hardship fund, and the first year arguably was slightly more significant. And to your question, Chair, if that money had not been forthcoming, you know, we did not have the reserve cover to withstand that. I guess, yes, we would have had to have reacted with some very significant changes, but as to whether the gap could have been closed quickly enough, jury's probably out on that one. And I do draw a comparison, actually. And again, it's useful for this knowledge build for the committee. But if you draw a comparison here between Wales and England, and I'll not go into the reasons for it, but Wales has benefited much better financially in terms of funding into local government and through its COVID hardship fund than, I guess, counterpart councils in England. And you don't have to go too far in reading the financial press or otherwise in terms of understanding the struggles of English authorities whose reserves were impacted very significantly. And so the challenges that we've talked about today and that we're looking forward and ahead to, at the very least, I can say that, you know, we've been able to restore and replenish reserves to give us the greatest chance possible to sort of withstand and work our way through all of that in the next few years. But yeah, if the hardship fund hadn't been forthcoming, full stop, or to a much lesser degree, then the council's finances would have been beyond fragile, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I'll pick up reserves when we come to the forward plan just at that stage. But just one other connected question to that is, so we've learned, you know, in the pandemic, and what we will have learned is things that we, I say this in regard to the, and not to be a harbinger of doom at all, but that the chief scientists and the chief epidemiologists and medical officers are telling us there will be further waves of the COVID pandemic, but there will also be further pandemics. So the learning that we have been able to take out of the last 2 years, would it be something that you, or have you already done, or would it be something that would be advisable from your point of view to do, to actually be able to pull together what worked, what didn't work, what we would have done earlier, what we would have done differently, what we might not have done at all, in order that we're as resilient and well prepared for what might be ahead of us as well as what's behind us?
Thank you, Chair. That point of clarification is helpful. Without going into too much detail in terms of the emergency response structures that fall into play under the Civil Contingencies Act, you know, the machinery that falls into play and fell into play back in March 2020 very successfully within the Gwent region, and obviously the council, along with other partners, worked in real time in being able to react and respond to what was playing out in front of it. So it's very much, I guess, and again, so Chair, you have a line of sight in terms of any forward scrutiny on this. So Matt Phillips, as Chief Officer for People and Governance, he holds portfolio responsibility for emergency planning. Emergency planning will have undertaken its own debrief in terms of its experience of going through, you know, this phase of the pandemic over the last 2 years. I understand, and I think that that's also been done at a Gwent level, Welsh Government level. Obviously, there are inquiries being stood up into various elements of situation with care homes through the pandemic. So, you know, the body of evidence that will be collated over time to make sure that we've learned, both at a local level, regional and national level, will all come together in time. But I would suggest that if that's something you want in further clarification on, maybe there's something that Hazel can lodge as an action, and I'm sure that Matt Phillips will duly come back with sort of a summary overview in terms of the lessons learned.
Thank you, Peter. And part of the reason is obviously that if we are hit by another pandemic, there might not be another 400-odd billion pounds floating around for the from national or UK government to support. So, being prepared will be important. Thank you for the answers and for the questions. I'm going to move us forward by moving the report, and with the recommendations, we've just, I think, I've just noted down one further one, but recommendations around understanding the inflation, the pressures that inflation brings about, and that, Peter, I think you've agreed that you'll provide more information as we move forward in the year on this, and I think that's going to be important so that we can properly understand the impact that we should be expecting as we move through the year. Clearly, month 4 is going to be critical to the committee, and I'll be expecting, and I'm sure members will be expected to be kept informed of the real situation as we move forward from year 4 and month 4 and month 5. And the third being to draw together the learning from the pandemic in terms of initially financial impact that can or did lead to service impacts, in order that we learn lessons to ensure that we're as resilient as possible for whatever might lie in store. And let's hope nothing more does, but we'll be better ready. So I'd be looking at those 3 recommendations. And with them, those recommendations there, could I move that we accept the report and those recommendations? Great, thank you. I'm seeing agreement around the several rooms that we're occupying. Great, we'll move forward, if we may, to the report number, on agenda item number 9. And thank you, Jonathan, Peter, for that, which is the self-assessment for 2021-22, which is indeed a very interesting document to read, and I'm sure we came at it with that in mind, and also the separate papers that were sent to members, and I'm grateful to Hazel and to Robert for forwarding that in terms of the additional self-assessment from officers, but also the risk register summary, which you will, I'm sure, have looked at with interest. And Richard, I'm not sure if you're going to, who's going to address this in particular. Richard, yourself would be able to do that. Thank you very much indeed. If you could possibly, and if you could, confine your remarks to reasonable brevity. I'm just conscious of time, and ensuring that the understanding will be that the documents have been read, so it's really just an overall summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. Richard Jones, Performance Manager at the Council. I'll just, in line with that introduction, Chair, just take a brief moment to give some context and take you through a brief overview of the report, and then happy to take any questions. I'll also introduce my colleague, Emma Davis, who's been integral in working through the self-assessment in the last few months of the Council, who joins us remotely as well. The self-assessment, this is the first time the Council takes self-assessment in line with the new requirements in the Local Government and Elections Wales Act. So first time we're presenting it to you, and I know the first meeting of the committee as well, so we'll hopefully all learn together about the process. The report is before you for you to scrutinise the Council's performance during 21-22, and also to use the report, I'm sure, to inform your next item on the work plan around the work programme you'll be setting as a committee. And perhaps just at this point, if I could pick up a question I think Councillor Chandler raised earlier that Peter addressed as well, about the connection between the role of the committee around finance reporting, performance reporting, the risk register you've mentioned, hopefully informing your view of the the work programme you take forward, you'll see some of this evidence start to triangulate. I think sitting in on the committee days has been really helpful for me. Issues raised, that John's raised around homelessness, adult social care, cost of living. I can certainly say from a self-assessment point of view, those are issues that are coming out, along with others. And similarly, our strategic risk register is flagging some of those issues and how we're looking to respond and try and mitigate those as well. So just sort of helpful from a performance perspective to add to the earlier answer from Peter from a financial perspective as well about how those come together. So just briefly turning to the report, just take you through very briefly what the report covers. So the report evaluates performance under each of the 5 priority goals in the Council's corporate plan, which also serve as the Council's wellbeing objectives up until this current year, 2022. And it also breaks down into detail the 22 areas of work that were identified to deliver the 5 goals. Each of those goals has been scored on a scale of 1 to 6 based on the Council's self-evaluation framework, which is shown in the report. The report also evaluates key activity delivered as part of the Council's interim coronavirus strategies that have been in place over the last couple of years. You may have heard those sort of more commonly referred to as the plans on a page, and those documents are really important in setting the Council's direction at different stages of the pandemic. And we felt it was important to include an evaluation of those within the self-assessment. And again, I know that links to questions from the committee already this morning about the impact of the pandemic on services in the last couple of years. And just to add around that, an evaluation score of level 5 has been added to those objectives based on the evidence set as well, which is in addition to what's shown in the current draft report. And finally, then, the report also assesses the effectiveness of what we're terming enabling functions, so those services that support us to meet changing demands and ensure sustainability into the long term of council services, so things like corporate planning, performance management, financial planning, workforce planning, procurement, use of our assets, and digital and data as well. So finally, perhaps, Chair, just to sum up in terms of key issues, in the report you'll see page 7 that identifies some of the key conclusions we've drawn from the self-assessment report and around how we understand our place, the delivery of our outcomes, the effectiveness of those enabling functions I talked about, as well as our partnership working and are we acting in accordance with our values. And then on page 44 of the report, you'll see our action plan, which is where we've identified some of the key actions we're looking to take to address some of the conclusions of the assessment. As I'm sure you appreciate, there's a lot of evidence in the report, and those actions looking to address some of the key themes coming out, and there will be more detail sitting in other related plans as well. But in terms of giving you an overview, hopefully that helps, Chair. I'm happy to try and take any questions. I say I'm conscious this is a high-level report. There may be more detail you want that the MRI or colleagues today may not be able to provide. That may be something either we bring back to you, or it might be that this is your opportunity to think about what you may want to drill into more in your work programme as well.
Thank you, Richard. I'm sure that will be the case in terms of moving forward in the forward work programme. Looking at questions, Councillor Bond, did I see you raising your hand? It's not digitally, but I think I saw it up. I wasn't sure if you were. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I have 2. Thank you very much. Another good document. Thank you very much. Very comprehensive. Couple of questions around carbon footprint. I can see that you've done lots of work towards lots of good work towards insulation, looking at fuels, looking at all different things. Just wonder whether there's any scope to be now looking at more towards the environmental impact of the things that we're doing, for example, and perhaps role modelling the behaviours in County Hall of and on site in the college canteen, of recycling, of using soaps instead of gels, so you haven't got the energy wastage of water treatment, and really thinking about don't use, reuse, recycle, rather than emphasis on the recycle. So perhaps education around that, and the understanding that plastics are ultimately from oils and fossil fuels. So the reduction in that means a reduction in the use of and taking the carbon out of the ground in fossil fuels? So that's the first one, please. And the second one, and have you thought about that? And could that be part of the look into reducing carbon footprint or the environment or protecting the environment? And there's lots of other examples. And the other thing was area committees, as that is one of the avenues of feedback for the performance. And I wondered for how we are doing as a council, and I wonder how they're set up, where they exist, and what's happening with them. I understand, of course, it's been difficult over the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. And Richard or Matthew, did you want to respond?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the questions. Yes, if I start around carbon footprint and if Matthew's got anything to add then around the area committee's part as well. I think some are obviously really helpful suggestions there around how we can reduce our carbon footprint as an organisation. I think in terms of what's come out of the self-assessment report itself, we've identified that we declared that we've declared climate emergency, we've put in place a climate emergency strategy and action plan, and good progress has been made in some of those areas. But the report recognises that actually there's more to do in terms of understanding our existing carbon emissions and how we can look to, I guess, have the maximum impact we can with the resources we have available on reducing those to meet our commitments. And I think Councillor Bond there, Chairs, has given some good practical examples about some of those areas that can be considered further to accelerate how we can reduce our carbon emissions as a council, and things that I'll sort of need to take back to the teams looking at that in more detail as well. Councillor Bond, if that's okay. So thank you for that. So Matt, do you want to pick up around the role of area committees?
Yes, probably the key thing to say here is to recognise area committees haven't been meeting in the recent period. There have been a number of evaluations of area committees over the years. And I understand that Councillor Catherine Fuchs, as the Cabinet Member for Engagement, will be commencing a piece of work on public participation fairly soon, and that will incorporate the future of area committees.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Bond, were you happy with those responses?
Yes, for now. Yes, thank you very much. Cheers.
That's great. I think one of the points around carbon reduction we can pick up in terms of recommendations. So there clearly will be follow up from that. So thank you, Councillor Chandler.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I'm probably not going to address any detail of the report now because I'm also on the Governance and Audit Committee who'll be looking at this report next week. And that's the nature of my question. I do notice that there's difference in versions. Here we have version 1.0, whereas next week we've been just circulated version 2.0, which implies there's substantial changes to that. I'd like some clarification on what the changes are for the report that we'll be looking at next week.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Chan, for the question. It's an important one to understand both the difference in roles between Governance and Audit Committee and Performance Overview Committee, and also recognising that this is a draft version that's been pulled together, and there are some small adjustments to it. So, yeah. So, obviously, I guess first of all, just to clarify that Performance and Overview's role in terms of scrutinising the Council's performance, which is doing today, Governance and Audit Committee's role around scrutinising the processes we have in place to ensure that our performance arrangements and governance arrangements are working effectively. In terms of the version number, whilst I appreciate it sounds like a substantial update, looking at the version history from 1.1 to 2.0, actually there's not been any major significant changes. It's more reflecting the fact that this report looks back on 21-22, and we've done a lot of work between April and now to bring the report together. As you can imagine, some of the finalisation of data and evidence is continuing to happen over the coming weeks, and things like some of the performance indicators have been updated. One of the perhaps more significant updates that's been made from this version, which went out to you last week, compared to the Governance and Audit Committee agenda that went out this week, is that scoring that's been attached to the coronavirus strategic aims I mentioned around level 5. The rest, in terms of any significant changes, I think we've added in action holders and timescales to the action plan as well for Governance and Audit Committee to consider, and that committee has a specific role in terms of assurance around the actions we're taking. But in terms of the vast majority of the conclusions and the detail is unchanged. And I think it's something probably we need to reflect on in our version numbering as well to make that clear what has been changed. But I'm happy to set out in the committee as well going forward if there are changes what they are, and we can obviously send this report will go to council as well in September, and again there may be some more data and evidence that's come forward in between that we'll that all councillors will see then, but fundamentally it shouldn't make significant changes to the assessment, but there are some.
Thank you, Richard. I also complimentary comments to Councillor Chandler for close powers of observation on noticing that in the first place. Matthew, I think you were looking to just add a couple of comments.
Yeah, it was only on that point of version numbers. Actually, yeah, very impressed someone reads the version history, Councillor Chandler. But yeah, just to be explicit, we use a 0.0 when something's in the public domain. So we use sort of 1.1, 1.2 on the draft version we're working with. When it goes out in the public domain, it becomes 2.0, even if there was a fairly minor change. So yeah, don't read too much into the 2.0. It's not that radical. Just signifies 0.0, it's a public version.
Thank you, Matthew. And Councillor Pavia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, obviously, Richard, for the report. Just looking at the Goal D under the lifelong and wellbeing, there's obviously some quite stark data there around increases in supporting adults, the number of children looked after coming in, and obviously supporting families around that as well. And I think it sounds like it's only going to increase. That was obviously a snapshot of the last year. I appreciate this is obviously the first one being done. There's obviously concerns there around the care in the community. Access to care and support is not always timely. There's obviously a met need in terms of care packages. 2,000 hours is quite substantial. I suppose in terms of the overarching comments there, in terms of collaboration with health, saying we've got the sort of proactive collaboration and it works well. I probably have some other concerns about how we collaborate with health, and in the way that health don't really collaborate with us in the best way that they should, particularly in terms of looking at the prevention and early intervention agenda. And I think that needs to change. In terms of capturing that information, you've obviously cited there, Directive Social Services report, Social Services user questionnaire. Do we capture any staff feedback in terms of understanding the nuances in that collaboration between local authority, social care departments, and health? Do we capture any staff data to understand? It's always difficult to put those relationships on the table sometimes and say how fraught they can be, but potentially capturing anonymised staff feedback on their interface with various elements of the health service would give us a better indication, I think, of where our partnership level is in terms of health. And in terms of the social services user questionnaire, is your team involved in reviewing those questions and before it goes out, just to understand that we are asking the right questions and getting that real important user feedback in terms of the service delivery that they're receiving? Thanks.
Thank you.
Chief, happy I'll pick that one up. And we've got Emma Davis as well as report authors attending remotely, and Emma will pick some of these up as well. We also have to be mindful not to neglect her just because she's on the screen. In terms of that point of staff feedback, I think one thing, we're incredibly proud of our record of joint working between health and social care, which predates by some margins, the recent legislation in this space and goes back to the beginning of 2005, 2006. We were having joint teams in place. Clearly, the health social care interface is incredibly complex. That sort of feedback will be captured and is captured in supervision, the professional supervision that social workers and others have with their immediate managers, that's then fed up and in an overall sense informs the conclusions that the Director of Social Services puts together, or the Chief Officer of Social Care, I should say, put together in their annual report. Because it's quite a hard one to capture in a numerical sense, and clearly there are challenges. There can sometimes be sensitivities, and that's how we would see that information coming through. But clearly huge challenges in terms of the health and social care interface. And then the point of the user questionnaire. I'm right in thinking, Richard, these are national questions.
Yeah, do you want me to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, just on the questionnaire, that's the design of that questionnaire has been informed by both involvement of the service areas themselves. Our team as a performance team have a role in that, as well as our customer relations team as well. And that's actually a long-standing survey of our adult social care service users. So that gives us a rich, not just current picture, but also looking at trends of how those changed. There has been a point where we've looked to review some of that to reflect current trends, to make sure we're asking the right questions, but also mindful about this being about the outcomes for the service user and look at how we can track that over time. So there's quite a wide range of involvement there, and also just a little bit of background around the social services performance framework in place for Welsh Government, an emphasis on that around how we use qualitative information, users' experience, research stories to inform our performance framework, as well as obviously a lot of metrics and performance measures as well. And you mentioned the Director of Social Services report, and that is the place really where all that evidence comes together, as Matt has mentioned as well. So I think in terms of bringing that evidence together, and also the outcomes of the user questionnaire will be part of that report. And I think that may be something that will come forward to the committee in possibly in its next meeting, should that be the place on the work programme. So that should bring all that evidence together, both quantitative, qualitative, and the views of service areas for you to consider.
Okay, Richard, thank you. And Emma, was there anything that you would like to add to comments already made?
Thank you, Chair. Just a small point, really, just to refer Councillor Pavia to the Care Inspector at Wales report that was produced back towards the end of last year. I can't say specifically whether it mentioned the partnership arrangements, but I do recall that there was quite a lot of work done with staff and quite a lot of feedback from staff noted in that report. So may well be of interest for Councillor Pavia.
That's really helpful, just pointing it us in that direction. I'm sure we can follow that up and appreciate that. Just a couple of questions, if I may. If I could possibly just, they're separate questions, but if I could just briefly ask them and look for relatively brief responses. So the focus includes being on agreed outcomes, which I think is, we'd probably agree is a very good thing. But there is little that explicitly assesses the impact, or whether positive, neutral, or negative, on residents and communities, which can be something a bit different on agreed outcomes. And I wonder if you think that this could be a stronger assessment if we were to include the an assessment of the impact, again, whether it's positive, neutral, or negative on communities and residents. Second question is really on goal A, which is just some concern over the rise in the percentage of NEETs, those year 11 school leavers who are not in education, training, or employment. It's gone up. The numbers seem small relatively, but it's gone up from 1.4 to 2%, and I just wonder if you could comment on that. And just the third one, as I say, they're not connected. The specific focus on 20-mile-per-hour schemes will have supporters and detractors. However, it would appear almost like that is the single measure that is being used in Goal C in regards to keeping the roads and the areas safe. Certainly listening to councillors, that it's been a pleasure to get to know since becoming a councillor, and also to residents in the run-up to the elections. Road safety in villages is an extremely significant concern, and it's not just in villages, it's in many of our country roads. And speeding and cut-throughs being a concern. And I just wonder what comments you might have on what other options there may be, such as speed ramps into villages, but speed cameras and a greater enforcement of measures that we might take to keep our roads safe. So three disconnected, and I'm sorry if they're disconnected, but possible responses would be welcome.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for those. If we take them in turn, and between me, Matthew, and Emma, we'll hopefully answer all three of them. In terms of agreed outcomes and the impact on resident communities, I think that's fundamentally what the self-assessment is about. It's about what is the impact this has had on residents, businesses, service users. So I think as we develop the self-assessment report further, recognising it's our first year and it is one of our actions, I think there's probably two things I'd say on that. The first thing is how we strengthen when we are assessing delivery of a service or policy priority, how we make sure we're demonstrating and assessing against the ultimate impact that has on the service user as part of it. So rather than seeing as that, as a separate section of the report, how can we strengthen throughout it when we're looking at our agreed objectives and our goals, how that is impacting on service users, and that may go back down into we're just talking, for example, about social care, where they use a questionnaire to look at how residents feel who are using services about those. So and that may be something we need to strengthen in other areas, for example. So there's potentially practice to learn as we develop and hopefully strengthen our approach to self-assessment, not just through the report. And I think, as it says in the report, and I would certainly support this, is about how we self-assess on an ongoing basis throughout the year. The report is the conclusion of that. And the second part about probably comes back to the involvement part, which we've got later on in the report around the views of residents and service users as well. And I know as an organisation we do a lot of engagement around new projects, initiatives, and a lot of service involvement. The duty of the Act actually is to strengthen some of that involvement. So I'm sure going forward as well around the involvement of residents in our services as well, that will also strengthen it. But in terms of impact, I think it's important we embed that through our goals. In terms of the NEAT figure, you're right, Chair, it obviously has risen. I know that is relatively small number of children who are NEAT, but obviously it's still important. I know our colleagues in the employment and skills team have a lot more granular detail around the experiences and outcomes of children who are working with them to look how they can support them into education and training opportunities. And obviously, without being involved in that detail, I wouldn't probably want to comment further. They would be far better placed than I to do that. But I know some of the circumstances that people in are complex as well, and there's lots of reasons they may find themselves NEAT. But I know that service is there to try and support them where they can. But obviously, they would be better placed to answer some of the detail. On the 20 mile an hour schemes, I think just to probably a point around the measure, I know is the number, but I think again that is one measure. But as you rightly say, there's a whole range of issues that are at play there in terms of ensuring road safety, and in the self-assessment report itself, whilst we've got the one measure in there, in terms of stepping back and thinking, how are we making roads, streets, villages safe? We need to consider a range of factors in assessing whether we're being effective in that. So So we have put some measures in as indications, but a measure is then only as good as a range of other information that supports it as well. So there is a bit of background around some of that, and particularly how it links to the self-assessment process. I don't know, Matt, Emma, anything to add?
I think the only thing I would add to that, I think that as around the question you spoke around what other measures may be in place. There has been quite a bit of work in this space in the past with the task and finish group under one of the previous scrutiny committees, and I understand that there is to be a policy coming forward in this area to place scrutiny committee as part of that committee's work programme, so that there'll be an opportunity there to scrutinise some of that detail before the policy is eventually adopted, but not a level of detail I have to hand today, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you, Richard and Matt. I'm going to propose that we move on and that we accept the report in front of us, which is the Monmouthshire County Council self-assessment, and there have been a number of points and recommendations that we've covered. I think you've probably made notes of some of these, but they will include carbon reduction plans to be reviewed and approaches considered for strengthening, the consideration of how we might be able to build stronger community and resident feedback and response into the outcomes focus, which is already within the work of the self-assessment report, and specific regard to the rise in numbers of NEETs and what strategies are in place to address that, recognising that the number may be in itself small. So I'm moving the report, colleagues, and recommendations. Are you supportive of that and the recommendations? Thank you. We'll move forward, and we're on to the closing straight here, which is the forward work programme. Now, I'm going to suggest that there are two aspects to this. Probably by the time I've gone through those two, I'll realise it's three, but if you'll forgive me. The first is that we've got already a number of areas that I'm going to actually try and summarise just now, but more importantly, we'll share with you by email so that you get a chance to look at it in terms of the forward work programme and areas that we think are going to be important for us. So as a quick summary of these, but not to get into the detail of them, that's not the purpose of this item, and that I will make sure you receive these by email very shortly. An area which we have strong interest in is across the public sector, and it touches on what we were discussing a little earlier, the council and community resilience and other partners' resilience working with us for what we are told will be the next pandemic, or what may be the next serious wave in winter of the COVID pandemic. And so not only looking at the council, but other partners, health, police and others, as well as community. And also looking at the use of reserves in terms of how they are applied, in terms of looking at pre-decisions. Looking also at procurement and the procurement aspects of the strength and weaknesses of our current work, which is in relation to partners. Recruitment and retention has been raised, and it's quite a strong theme, one that we may well want to build into our forward work programme. The asset management strategy itself, and to consider ways in strengthening it. We will have in September the Social Care and Health Director's report for the September meeting. Hazel, will we have that in advance of the meeting? So we'll be able to potentially build into that. And also the budget monitoring report, which we would have for most meetings, but we should have again for September 29th. That should be in our forward work programme. Before just moving into the second area of this, which I was going to suggest as a breakout session that we may well want, a workshop workshop session that we may well want to bring up. I should ask Hazel if there are any aspects of the forward work programme itself, that the report, that you wished to highlight.
Chair, I'm conscious of time and members have been here some time, but I did place a report on the agenda which sets out how scrutiny committees should formulate their work programmes. It's a generic report that's been taken to each of the scrutiny committees, but it just recommends that you have a planned approach to developing your work programme, focusing on maximum effectiveness of scrutiny within timescales. So the one thing I would highlight to you as a committee, particularly based on this morning's performance, is that if you want to do in-depth scrutiny, you need to have fewer items on the agenda and to really focus on where you can add value. So the key recommendations of that report are that you utilise the process outlined in Appendix 1 to help you develop your work programmes. That's a sort of checklist, questions that you ask yourself when you raise topics in order to help you prioritise which areas would be best to scrutinise. So thinking about your respective remits of the other scrutiny committees and avoiding duplication, but also your capacity and resources when prioritising topics. The main thing to focus on is adding value and contributing to the Council's strategic direction. So there's quite a bit of information for new members in 3.1 about the new structure, which I don't propose to go through. It's there for you to read. But paragraph 3.5 is of most importance to you. It outlines your responsibilities, which are different to those of the two policy scrutiny committees, in holding the Cabinet to account for the performance of all services, risk management, robust financial monitoring, as well as some of the areas that you might want to focus in on more detail following on from discussions you've had today. So all of the reports that have been brought to you today have been brought to you in the context of helping you to identify areas that you might want to scrutinise in the future. And you'll probably see some areas already that are triangulating in your minds and will help you to focus on where you can add value. So we've got lists of different sort of areas: corporate plan, corporate assessment, risk register, suggestions from officers, members, the public, and then obviously performance monitoring and budget reports, audit inspection reports. Just to let you know that there are options for you to hold scrutiny workshops, and you might choose to look at some of these things in greater detail. For example, if you wanted a greater understanding of the inflationary pressures, which has been referred to this morning, you could have a workshop on that. If you wanted to take the risk register and look at that in detail and then highlight areas that you'd like to call the Cabinet members in at a future meeting and hold them to account on specific risks, you could do that via a workshop. So I would just highlight to you that your September meeting, if you choose to look at some of the things that have been suggested, you're looking at 4 quite substantial items. But one of those items could be to receive the risk register and then set up a workshop to look at the risk register in greater detail. So those are just suggestions, Chair.
Hazel, they're really good suggestions, Hazel, and the idea of actually establishing a workshop to give ourselves the opportunity, it wouldn't be live streamed, it would be an opportunity for us to go into the issues and delve into them more significantly around the strategic risk register seems to me a very good suggestion. We'd need to look for a date in the diary, and it would probably be in September at some stage, and the link with the inflationary pressures that we were spending a bit of time in seems a very clear link in terms of strategic risk. So combining those two together in a workshop may well be a very good use of our time. Councillor Bond.
I think it's brilliant. That piece of that bit of information is brilliant. I wonder if it'd be possible to add it to the induction when we went through the induction, because that's a lot of us were feeling, well, how does it all fit in? How can we make sure that we're not covering another group's covering, and make sure that we are asking the right questions and utilising this time the best we could? So I just wondered if it could, in the future, possibly for new starters, add to induction and make sure everyone who's on the scrutiny committees has sight of that a long time before the meetings, and perhaps a pre-meeting to be able to discuss that further and really understand it. Thank you.
Hazel?
Yes, it was sort of covered quite briefly in the induction. We didn't want to give too much information and sort of blindside members, but I just would like to take this chance, Chair, to just plug some training that we've got next week, which is Scrutiny Chairs training, but it's also for Vice Chairs, but we've had interest from the Chair of Audit, the Chair of the Council. It's being provided by Ian Bottrell, who most of you will have met through other training. And whilst there has been some Chairs training already, I would recommend that anybody with an interest in becoming a future Chair or Vice Chair, or even chairing other committees such as, you know, some of your town council chairs, you know, that might help you. You're welcome to attend that, and I will send out a reminder to email everybody. The other thing to mention, Chair, is that we do have a Scrutiny Chairs meeting, which is regular, diarised, and the 4 Scrutiny Chairs meet there with myself, Matthew, and the Chair of Audit. And what our role is to avoid duplication, so to make sure that other Scrutiny committees and Audit Committee are not all doing the same pieces of work. So just want to give you that assurance that we have that mechanism to avoid duplication. In terms of looking at the strategic risk register, if you wanted to have a workshop on that, it would probably make sense to bring the strategic risk register to your September 29th meeting so that you formally receive it, and then to have a workshop after that where you can go through in some detail and formulate then which areas are key areas and which future members of the executive you'd like to call in. So just in terms of timescale, that's likely to be October for that workshop.
Hazel, that's great. That's really, really helpful. So if colleagues, if you're in agreement with that, we'll schedule, not for September as I was suggesting, but October, as Hazel's just clarified, is a much better way of going about that. So if you're in agreement to that, we'll try and schedule a meeting to into October. Thank you. And yeah, so we have our forward work programme in outline. I think we're going to need to bear in on it, and we've got to also recognise we're picking up the corporate plan later this year that we'll need to build into this. So I do suggest that we move forward with that forward work plan in outline by sending out to you what I've just articulated in headline points, and see if we can crack on with that and begin to build that into a forward work programme, and we can identify what areas we may wish to have greater focus on or less focus on. But if you'll allow me, I'll make sure that we get that sent out to you very short order so that you've got sight of that as well as having heard it this morning. And I'm just conscious of time, and we've got about 3 minutes left on our scheduled time, I think, for the meeting. So I'd like to move the report as it stands, and the recommendation that we will send around the items that have already been identified for your information, and that we'll also build a meeting in of a workshop into October, and simply accept the report. Councillor Bond, yes, and we'll need to be brief.
Can we have that guidance on the scrutiny committees as a separate document, please? Because I'd like to print that off and really read through it and understand it.
The answer very much to that. Thank you, Councillor Bond. Okay, so with about 2 minutes left, and thank you, everybody. I know that there's not been very much going on in the world outside today. It's been a quiet day. But I appreciate everyone's concentration and managing to no doubt balance mobile phones on your laps or whatever whilst you're catching up with what's going on there. Our next meeting is on the 29th September, and look forward to seeing you then. And we'll have a fair amount to do between now and then. But in the meantime, wishing you all a very good holiday if you're able to get away, and look forward to seeing you in the course of the weeks and months ahead. Thank you again.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, well chaired. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.